Good afternoon or good evening. Today is Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. It is around 6 o'clock p.m. and this is a meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee. My name is Jeff Schilling and I'm chair, and I have Mrs. Snee to my right, and Mr. Pierce is absent tonight. And we are here to provide a recommendation to Council regarding the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission that Council enact legislation to amend the zoning code to prohibit adult use cannabis operators and to provide for adult use testing laboratory as a permitted use in the M3 General Industrial District. Mr. Kittering, you can help us with this?
I don't know if I'll be helpful, but I'll try. 3 points. You have the updated memo, just based on it, summarized the public comments that we've gotten,
yes,
and all the literature that was handed out, as well as some other. Just a couple of points of note, I guess. The moratorium that's in place, that would be set to expire January 19th of 2025. So just keep that in mind. If there's any prolonged discussion about this, then may want to consider even another extension. Not recommending that yet, but just something for us to keep in mind. I was informed you have in that packet a letter from the police chief, the fire chief, the mayor, one of the county commissioners.
Yeah, the Committee for Drug. They have a title.
Well, that is just the Troy contingency or contingent as part of Miami County Drug Free. My point is that I'm told that the board or that the entire group, which is 112, I don't know that they all did, but it was a majority of them that were represented. They will be submitting a like letter on behalf of the whole coalition and not just this small group. And so I was just forwarding that for information.
Okay.
And then, without getting into any other of the detailed points, I'll just say that Mr. Kerber is here and is available to answer all the technical questions, because this could get a little complicated.
Okay. All right. I was expecting a bigger crowd tonight, but that's okay. Glad you're all here. I know you both, all three of you have talked about cannabis. And again, we want to remind you that we're limiting this to the discussion of the dispensaries and testing labs, and not weighing the good or the bad of the cannabis in question. I think what we do first, Lynn, is maybe, does anybody in the audience like to add anything to the discussion now, or we just, Brad, come on up. State your name and address, please.
Sure. Bradley Beringer, 105 Crestwood Drive. I just have a question, and I didn't think about this until I reread the info or I would have asked this on Monday. Why are we banning dispensaries but allowing testing labs? If it's kind of counterintuitive to ban one but not the other. If you're going to ban one, ban them all.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I was going to try to pause Mr. Beringer before he even started, but you mentioned dispensaries in your introduction. The discussion is about operators, and operators are dispensaries, cultivators, and processors. Labs are something different. Labs are not covered under the Chapter 3780, except as to not be allowed to prohibit or restrict them, other than put them in the zoning district that we're talking about.
But it would make sense if you're going to have a ban, ban them all, wouldn't it?
You cannot ban the testing facilities. They are different.
According to state regulations.
Right. That is not part of the definition of operators.
Well,
the banning or restricting of operators are three things, and one of them is not testing.
But it would seem to me that if we're going to have a blanket ban, that we ought to ban everything. Because
Okay.
if you listen to the antis that have spoken, they are in favor of a total ban. So it seems counterintuitive to me, regardless of, it says we have a right to enact a ban, right, in the ballot.
ban
Well, we
on
can't do
operators.
anything with testing laboratories.
Yeah, a ban on operators.
Operators only, that's the only thing we can talk about
So
tonight.
if it doesn't
The
sound-
testing laboratory, if somebody wants to set up a testing laboratory in Troy, they'll do it in the M3 business zone.
Well, what I'm afraid you're going to open yourself up to then, if you allow it, is they're going to set up a testing lab, and then they're going to find out a way to weasel in a dispensary. I would not be surprised if that happened.
That would not happen. Okay,
Well, it may happen, but we would pursue that as a violation.
right, yeah.
So I'm going to go back to something I said last week. 5347 was the vote that allowed the use of recreational marijuana, issue 2. Now I know we're not talking about that, but I'm just going to put that out there, and I'm going to say this. I'll reiterate what I said on Monday. Marijuana's here whether we like it or not. If we're going to let go $600,000 a year in revenue that these dispensaries could be bringing in, we're looking at borrowing $14 million to fix up our parks. Where's that money going to come from? I'd rather have the $600,000 a year guaranteed revenue that these dispensaries could bring in, rather than lose that to Piqua, lose that to whoever has a dispensary. This is backward thinking because we didn't do our homework. And the antis are going to sit up here and moralize for me. They don't speak for me. One of the things that they said was, well, children can get access to marijuana. Well, half the times when children access marijuana, it's because it's carelessly left laying around somewhere, usually in the home. Are we going to be infiltrating everybody's home? Again, the antis don't speak for me. I say let's bring it in and reap the money. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes.
can clarify. First of all, the idea that we are going to borrow $14 million for park and recreation, you were not here Monday night. That did not come up in discussion there in our budget meeting because it is specifically not part of the budget. That was only one of many different funding alternatives that, has only been talked about in general concepts. There is no indication that we're going to do that. The only thing we're going to do in 2025 is have a park and recreation strategic plan. So the rumor that has been spread about a $14 million bond borrowing is absolutely 100% false. Secondly, the idea that or the estimate of a $600,000 annual revenue windfall, that's also unsubstantiated. As a matter of fact, that comes from Piqua, not from Troy, first of all. Second of all, that was based on 2 dispensaries, and it was also based on an initial forecast based on the medical operations that have been ongoing in medical dispensaries that have been ongoing in Piqua since, I believe, 2017. You'll have to ask Piqua administration if they still are forecasting $600,000 after a few months of operation. I'm not sure that they are. I can tell you that if we did, allow, not only allow, but license a dispensary or multiple dispensaries, at this point we could not estimate any kind of revenues because we have no idea what kind of revenue generation there would be to generate the sales tax portion that we would be able to retain. Right. So that's just very pie in the sky and very, very speculative.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Titterton. Anybody else would like to come on up, name and address?
Steve Henderson at 975 Dickerson. I don't care if we make any money on dispensaries or not. It's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. The issue to me is one of freedom. Voters of the state, the voters in Troy, approved this. Now, is this going to be another example of, oh, you voters, you don't know anything, but we know better, so we're going to ban the dispensary even if you all want one? So I think it's an issue of fairness. I took a look at the questions that people filled in from the city. It was similar to the questionnaires I used to get from the Republican Party, which started off as, oh, do you support the communist manifesto that the Democrats are setting? It's like, what the hell kind of question is that? This one was the same way. It should have been neutralized. There should be a neutral question rather than do you support the thing. Now, I don't know who wrote it. If you did, fine, at least you wrote it, and we got people back. But as I recall, even the summary of the results of that were about the same as the vote. It was just a little bit more positive than negative. So I understand you can do whatever you want to do. I'm asking you to kind of listen to the voters. The voters are here. The Planning Commission, there's not a single person on there except for the mayor that runs for office, which is kind of surprising in its own right. So that, they don't stand for re-election, so quite frankly, they can say and do whatever they want. Point is, voters voted on this. You have an opportunity to listen to the voters, or you can ignore them. And you can do it, and you can do it legally, and you can probably write up a whole bunch of stuff that justifies it because you all know better. But I think it's wrong. If I take a look at the ballot that we all signed, followed by 7 pages of legal mumbo-jumbo, I don't know if you all read those other 7 pages attached to the ballot. I don't remember reading those 7 pages when I voted, and I bet there's very few people in this room or this building that read the other 7 pages. So I don't know what those 7 pages said. I'm going to have 4 more birthdays before I'm going to go through all that mumbo-jumbo of legalese. But anyway, please listen to the voters for a change. I understand all the moralizing that goes on. I'm old enough, I don't need to be lectured to anymore. I already know the dangers of cigarettes. I already know the dangers of alcohol. I don't need to get another lecture on what's going to happen to me if I start smoking marijuana. Especially when the voters said, let it be. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so much, which we appreciate it. Anybody else in the audience like to, it covers everybody, okay. Other council people, Mr. Seaver.
Yeah, Mr. Schilling, thank you. First, I appreciate Mr. Hendrickson's comments. There's a couple of things well, let me start with this comment. I know other people, but I adamantly pushed for a public input prior to this the last time. I believe we got that to some extent. Much like you, I thought we would see much greater influence from the outside community at our meetings. Even our public hearing was attended, but not what I would consider well attended based upon the number of people that have expressed interest in this particular subject. The responses, as I received them, and just to sort of clarify from what was recently stated, were running about 2/3 against having a dispensary. Did any numbers change since that, Mr. Dinner?
Yeah, I know there was a lot of pages in the packet, but my memo did clarify that it is about 50-50.
Okay.
For a ban and against.
Okay. The other issue, and again, perhaps I did come back from being gone last week, and maybe you did address that, but what got adopted was not a recreational marijuana dispensary law. It was 3780 of the Ohio Revised Code, which specifically contained the retention of a local authority to make a determination as to whether they wanted or did not want a dispensary. So I'm not trying to mince or make it more difficult there, Steve, from your comments, but I do think it's important to understand what really happened with that vote, and perhaps those were the pages that you were talking about attached to the ballot. But what got adopted was 3780, which specifically states the legislative authority of a municipal corporation may adopt an ordinance, or a board of township trustees may adopt a resolution to prohibit or limit the number of adult use cannabis operators permitted under this chapter within the municipal corporation. So I don't see the vote here as being one on whether we can have a dispensary, not have it, or, I mean, I guess it is on whether you can have a dispensary, not have a dispensary, not on whether recreational use of marijuana can occur and whether it's going to be enforced by law enforcement. The third issue that I wanted to bring is I have waffled on this a little bit myself, and I went to Columbia, Missouri this past weekend, where it is legal and where it is downtown, and there are just, I mean, to me, I just found it hugely offensive. Maybe other people won't, but there's great big signs that say, cheapest high in Columbia, $25 blocks available here, gummies with the highest level of cannabis permitted by law, and you see all these signs walking through a downtown that's comparable to Troy's, basically. It's probably 4 or 5 blocks with a lot of different stores with a lot of caricatures and bongs and just things that I don't think would be attractive in our downtown. So what all this culminates with, from my perspective, and I did have some communication with Mr. Kerber, my issue would be if we do not allow, if we do a total ban on dispensaries, and it is subject to a referendum. Obviously, we're at a 50-50, just like a lot of things in America right now, there's an even divide. So if it would be subject to a referendum, and the referendum was successful, would that put us in a situation where a dispensary could be located anywhere near downtown or anywhere where we could lose that control of maintaining a dispensary free downtown area?
Well, that the answer to that sort of hinges upon a couple other factors. First off, as everybody is aware, there's a moratorium in place, and as a separate and unique piece of legislation. So under the first scenario, assuming that the moratorium is not extended past its current expiration date, and council passes an ordinance that's consistent with the Planning Commission's recommendation, if a referendum was timely filed and appropriately filed, that would put a stay on the prohibition against establishing operators in the city of Troy. So in that instance, yes, an applicant or an operator under those fact patterns could establish a dispensary or a cultivator or a processor while until such time as the voters or the electors voted on that issue. Because under the zoning code, even though dispensaries and operators, there is a prohibition on medical marijuana or medical operators from setting up or establishing a use in Troy. There's no such prohibition on the recreational side. So under the code, if there's a proposed use, in this case, say a dispensary, somebody sought to go through and the moratorium wasn't in place and the prohibition was being subjected to a referendum, in that instance, the zoning administrator would be under an obligation to say, okay, what use in our zoning code that's a principal permitted use is most like a dispensary? And I don't know if that would, and I can't speak for the zoning administrator to make that determination as to what conclusion he would make in this situation, but there are uses such as retail establishments is probably the most likely. So under that scenario, yes, a dispensaries and would be allowed in some of the business districts. And not residential, but, and I would have to go through each of those different, because Troy has 4 or 5 different business, like the highway district, the downtown district, general business district, and things like that. Those are the ones that it would be most likely under that scenario where they could be established while the voters were waiting to vote at the referendum.
And if the referendum succeeded, would that use be able to be permitted, and it's for as long as it was a successful venture?
Well, yes, it would be yes, because any subsequent change to the code, if the planning commission came back and said, okay, we want to establish it just here, it would be a non-conforming use that could continue, or it's commonly called grandfathered.
Grandfathered in, right?
Mr.
Well,
Herbert?
wait a minute, I guess I'm not understanding, Grant. So let's say the council passes a total ban. There's a referendum. The moratorium is extended past the November election date so that everything truly freezes, which is what happens.
I wasn't operating under that assumption that the moratorium was extended. My answer was based upon the moratorium was not in place.
Okay, well, that's one reason why I mentioned the January 19th.
Right.
And my other question is that if we pass this, any decision that the council make, if it was passed under emergency, would not be subject to referendum, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
But council would have to, identify and give me direction as for the cause of the, what the reason for the emergency legislation is.
Right. Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to, I had similar questions to what Mr. Sievert mentioned, so I guess I'm trying to understand that if these were allowed, we don't currently have in the zoning code anything that defines specifically where adult cannabis operators are allowed. We would just allow them any place that we allowed a retail?
It would be, the actual language, Mrs. Snee, is the zoning administrator would, if there was a proposal to add a dispensary, it could be different for an operator or a processor, obviously, as well, but the zoning administrator would have to make a determination that such use is similar and compatible to those uses expressly permitted within such district. So, and my first inclination is, and I didn't realize that the zoning code didn't say like tobacco shops or something like that. It doesn't have that, but it would have to be, it does, yeah. That could be a similar use. That would be the similar use. Mm-hmm.
As a zoning administrator, I can pretty well say that would be the like and similar use. And it's the specific language is cigars, cigarettes, tobacco, retail sales.
Okay.
We allow those anywhere, basically.
In any business district?
Yeah, in all the B districts, yes.
Okay.
And we have at least 3 B districts in the downtown, along with 10 other zoning districts carving in and out of different properties.
And nothing about the downtown historic district would preclude a business like that operating?
That's just an overlay district.
Okay.
Mr. Schilling, I
Go ahead.
follow up on that a little bit. So, and Grant, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. If you want to get back with an answer before council, that's fine. But, so if my understanding is we have a couple options. We can send it back to the planning commission and just say, hey, we reject this, correct? We can adopt this. Can we send it back with like, hey, we're concerned about this and we want it to be in the B4 district, so that, or I don't know, I'm just making up a district, but like a district that's out of the downtown and out by 41 or whatever, are we allowed to do that as council, or are we stepping on planning commission's toes, or can we just modify it ourselves?
The planning commission can make a different recommendation that you act upon. If you don't act upon this one, it could die on its own. So, yes, the planning commission could be enlisted to make a different recommendation. However, if council just goes ahead and proceeds and says, we want something different than what the planning commission recommended, and we want it to be presented to council, that legislation would have to be passed by 3/4 of the council members.
Okay, and the moratorium ends January 19th?
Yep. Mr. Whidden, any comments, questions?
So I kind of see things, some of the issues that Mr. Sievert brought up, public input we got, the language on the ballot, the election. I think it's a close run thing, and we asked for public input, and the thing was pretty close. I guess I stand with, I don't think there's any greater public input than the election we had in November, but I also don't feel like we want to have this in our downtown. Mr. Sievert brings up some salient points about, I've driven up to Michigan, I've seen the signs on the highway up there, and it can be a bit much. And that's not something I think we'd want around here. That's not something I think we can control necessarily, but.
To your point there, the Ohio law, the regulation passed by Ohio legislature, there can be no bulletin boards, or there can be no billboards anywhere in the state of Ohio advertising use of cannabis. The cannabis dispensary cannot put anything in their windows that shows what they have inside. You can't look inside. Of course, the Planning Commission regulates our signage. So the things that Mr. Sievert were talking about wouldn't happen unless the Planning Commission would allow it. But they can't be advertising, like you say, the biggest hit in the state, or they cannot. This essentially, my understanding is they can have a sign out saying what their name of their store is, and basically you can't look inside to see what's inside. They can't display anything in any windows. So it's pretty much a blank building.
But you can't sell bongs either. But if you go around, they sell these tobacco water bottles that you can get.
They can't put anything in their windows.
No, I understand.
Okay. If somebody's doing that, it'd be somebody next door.
Yeah. Well, irrespective, I think we would all agree we don't want any of that downtown. No matter.
Oh yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Well, and I just want to make a comment that with respect to what's been said tonight and other nights, I don't feel like the decision I'm making is responding in any kind of, trying to come down on the moral side of whether or not we have marijuana use. That was decided in the state issue, but that state issue also included the ability for local governments to decide whether or not we would have these operators within our jurisdiction. And to me, that is the decision we're making. The decision about recreational marijuana use has been decided. It's decided at the state level. It's allowable in Troy, and nobody's questioning that. So I think some things I'm hearing are conflating that decision with what we are speaking to, and that is simply, do we want to have these businesses in Troy? And as others have said, my concern is that I really do not want to see that type of business downtown, and knowing how zoning works and that we wouldn't be able to pick and choose where someone might want to operate, and knowing that we have already gone through this discussion and banned medical marijuana operators, I just think moving forward I would be in agreement with what's being proposed by Planning Commission here.
Okay. Well, yes, Steve, go ahead. If you want to add, that's all right.
I need some help from Mr. Sievert.
Sure.
Can can I show you something we can talk about? What I'm gonna show him is the ballot that was on that we all voted on. And there's a section there, basically it says, and it's a little confusing, written probably by a lawyer, but it sounds to me when I read it that the municipalities are somewhat limited in what you can do. Now, I understand that the next 7 pages of legal stuff probably says, oh, well, don't forget what that says, but we know better, and this is what we want to do.
Mr. Hendrickson, well, we have it. We all have it. Yes, he has it. He probably not, no, I get it. So let me explain what this is. This is part of the ballot, but it's not just part of the ballot, it's more than that. So at the beginning of the ballot, it says to enact chapter 3780, right? That's the question that was asked. Okay. So the next 7 pages, yeah, it probably was written by a lawyer, but, well, that's not our, I mean, that's, okay. We can't do that, but that is the actual law, that is the text of chapter 3780 that is now codified into the Ohio Revised Code. That's what the point is. So the question on the ballot was, voter, do you want this section enacted and adopted? And as part of that, if you look on page, I don't know, well, I guess, so, if, I'll get you a magnet.
The voters in Ohio or Troy read those 7 pages?
Well, that's not, that's nothing we can do about that. This is now the law. We are a statutory city. We have to follow that, right? So .25 is the section that specifically says the municipality or a township, anybody, any local government can regulate or ban operators if they want to. And that was part of the question to the voter as part of, do you want 3780 adopted? I understand. I saw the same language when I voted for it, and I was like, boy, that's a lot of words.
On the ballot, it kind of restricts what municipalities can do on the ballot.
That's correct.
And I think what I mean, if I had to interpret that, I would say that we can't go and disagree with what was approved by the voters of Ohio. We can't just say you can't use recreational marijuana in Troy. But according to what was approved, the decision we can make and what we're making is that we can ban dispensaries.
I don't have this on that. No, I know what you have. I have a copy of that. There's 37.825 if you want to look at it.
What was on the ballot?
Yeah, but if you, and I'm not trying to lawyer. That's what's on the ballot.
It was part of the ballot.
So yeah, we can talk about this off the deal. But what this says, Steve, is prohibiting or limiting adult use, home grow, or prohibiting or restricting any activity authorized or proposed by law. So that doesn't really apply to the dispensary aspect, which has a separate code.
Isn't the dispensary part of the law?
It is part of the law, and it says municipalities have the right to control it.
But that doesn't say that here.
That is controlling it.
I understand 100%. Somewhere in the attached 7 pages, it says that.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't draft it, Steve.
I know. Yeah, I think your beef is with the state attorney general's office who wrote it.
Who
but
against it to begin with? We all know that.
Okay.
Look, I think the fundamental issue is I think people first need to decide yay or nay on that issue, and then, but more importantly, from my perspective, I want to do whatever is necessary to make sure it doesn't show up downtown. I want to keep our downtown, and if that's what we've just heard from Grant. I think we need to digest what Grant just said, but that might be sending it back to the Planning Commission and saying, hey, maybe we should do one dispensary and put it out here so we avoid issues. I don't know the answer to that.
So I think that makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah. I guess my question for Mr. Kerber is that an appropriate way to handle this, since the Planning Commission's already given their recommendation?
Yeah, what are they going to tell us different?
I know.
And I say that because
we tried this before with medical marijuana. It did not
the
work.
council has to act within 90 days on what the Planning Commission recommended.
Well, council does not have to act within 90 days. If they do not act, the planning commission, it dies.
Yeah.
Correct.
But again, my question would be I mean, planning commission has made their decision. They feel that it's not appropriate for the city of Troy. And so if the council feels differently about that, then it's really up to us to design the package to be voted on. I don't think we're not going to go back to the planning commission. Will just come back and say, well, we don't want it again. I mean,
They certainly can do that.
that's their option, and what's going to change their mind?
Well, here's
So
a better
our
way.
role as
Brad,
a committee tonight.
please.
I'd like to speak again on, because here's a better way of
Can I
doing it.
just say something, please?
Put it to the voters.
Can I
Put it
say
to the
something,
voters.
please?
We did it with the door, let's put it to the
Sit
voters.
down. Okay.
Our role as a committee here tonight, having received this recommendation and made the decision to listen to public input, our role is to decide what we are passing on to council for their
Right. Exactly.
decision. We can't make that decision. We're only saying how we feel based on everything we've heard so far.
Right.
So,
Okay.
as far as I've said, as far as I'm concerned, understanding that we are not speaking to the recreational marijuana use, we are simply speaking to the effective ban of operators in the city of Troy with the carve out for the testing laboratories. I would say that if you're asking me, I'm ready to move forward with that with an affirmative recommendation.
Okay. Well, again, our committee has been tasked with recommending to council whether or not cannabis dispensary is recreational, should be permitted to operate in the city of Troy. If a positive recommendation is made that we want a dispensary to be to operate, then we should also recommend zoning locations and the number of cannabis operators to be permitted to operate. The legal use of cannabis in any form should not be considered by this committee. Under the guidelines established by the voters approved Ohio constitutional amendment and the established laws of the state of Ohio, the use of cannabis is legal in the city of Troy. However, of course, recreational use of cannabis is not legal under federal law. So what's the impact of the image of the city of Troy? That was one of the things that was brought up. Troy has been described as a family-friendly community with a small-town vibe. Some feel this view of Troy may be altered or damaged if a dispensary is allowed to open anywhere in the city. There has been discussion on whether or not a dispensary should be allowed in the downtown historical area of Troy. Under Ohio law, public consumption of cannabis is not allowed. So, you're not going to be seeing users floating around the downtown, at least they shouldn't be, because they're just not allowed to use it in public. If the recommended, again, we're talking about the testing labs. They should be probably in the M2 zoning area. M3 is in my estimation, that's where our strip club is. You put things you don't want to. I mean, you can. Oh yeah, we allow this in Troy, but we're going to put it in the M3, so they can't be built there.
Mr. Chair, we do not currently have a strip club. That's the only area one could.
I know that.
Exist.
I know that.
Theoretically.
There's no. But anyway, there's very little land available zoned M3 in the city of Troy. A cannabis dispensary has a number of requirements for safety and security. Products sold by dispensary cannot be displayed in the store windows. The interior cannot be viewed from the outside. Dispensaries are permitted to operate drive-through windows. Business signs are regulated by ordinance in the city of Troy, and all signs must be approved by the planning commission. So I think, Todd, Mr. Seaver, what you're talking about as far as signage and this type of thing, that probably would not be something that would be allowed. Again, I don't think it'd be appropriate for the downtown. Cannabis operators are not permitted to advertise using billboards anywhere in the state of Ohio. A freestanding location in the B4 or M2 zoning district might be suitable for a dispensary. A B4 zoning near the interstate where other retail businesses are located the dispensary might more or less blend in. I know we've got so again, that may be a possibility. And again, the M2 zoning area is located away from residential areas, and a dispensary would be less likely to be seen by visitors to Troy. And of course, the city of Troy has the authority to regulate the number of cannabis operators permitted within the city boundaries. My only comment there is I have a hard time giving somebody one business being dominant in the city of Troy. If we're going to do a dispensary, we should have two. I mean, we did this. We allowed when we set up our many years ago when we set up our cable operation, we gave that cable operation permit to one company, and they strung about 500 feet of cable and then sold it to Time Warner. So, they made a lot of money on that, but it didn't help the city of Troy. And so, I don't think that if we're going to do it, we're going to probably have two operators just for competition, more than anything else. So, what's the economic impact? As Mr. Tittering has already said, the city of Troy it's unknown. An additional tax of 10% is levied on every sale of cannabis. 3.6% of the 10%, or 36%, will be directed to the city of Troy. The sales figures for recreational cannabis in the state of Ohio from August of 2024 to the week ending November 4th, 2024, total $143 million. The total sales for medical cannabis from April of 2019, when it was first legal, ending to November 4th, 2024, total over $2 billion. As several residents have stressed by the numbers, the legal use of recreational cannabis has been approved in the state in a statewide election by the majority vote of the residents of Troy. I do not believe that this vote can be discounted. Will allowing dispensaries affect our children? Been a big question about this. The Miami County Drug-Free Coalition, I think Mr. Tittering was talking about this group earlier, submitted a letter to council outlining the perils of drug addiction faced by our children. The coalition talked about the epidemic of increased marijuana cannabis usage at Troy High School and the difficulties of combating it. We had Mr. and Mrs. Justice presented articles on how cannabis potency has increased over the years, thus increasing the likelihood of addiction. What the information tells us is that our teenage children or underage children and grandchildren have easy access to cannabis. Our children and grandchildren are buying cannabis from their friends and their classmates. They are being supplied by their parents, siblings, other relatives, or guardians. They are buying cannabis from local neighborhood dealers. What they are not doing is purchasing cannabis from state-supervised cannabis dispensaries. Under the laws of the state of Ohio, dispensaries are not permitted to sell cannabis to anyone under the age of 21. The presence of cannabis in Ohio has increased in recent years because possession of medical marijuana and now recreational marijuana, cannabis, is now legal. Since the possession of cannabis was legalized in Ohio back in 2019, $2.1 billion of cannabis sales have been taken off the streets and moved to dispensaries regulated by the state of Ohio. Currently, our children and grandchildren are more likely using unregulated cannabis whose quality is unknown and whose content is unknown. Their suppliers are not concerned with the quality and content of what they are selling. If dispensaries are readily available, will adult family members who supply their children now be more likely to use state dispensaries for their cannabis purchase rather than purchasing the cannabis on the street? If your child or grandchildren or family member are using cannabis and you cannot persuade them not to use, where would you want their cannabis to be purchased? The street or a regulated dispensary? Is it better and safer for all users of cannabis to purchase their drug of choice from a dispensary rather than the street? So again, these are some things that we have to consider. Again, like I say, the kids are getting the drugs. This is a demand issue. you'll never cut down the supply of cannabis or any other drug for that matter until you figure out what the demand is. Why are people demanding this type of stuff? You know, we've lost the war on drugs a long time ago. And, but again, it's you know, we have to figure out how to dissuade the users not to use is basically what it boils down to. And we haven't done a very successful job on that. So again, you know, I think that, you know, dispensary properly located, you know, is something that the city ought to consider. I don't think it should be in the downtown. I think it should be out in M2 or B4 zoning, away from the downtown, away from residential neighborhoods. And of course, then you have the restrictions on schools and churches and things like that as well out there. So I think that would be, you know, but again, having a dispensary is not going to slow down the drugs. It's not going to increase the drug traffic. It's not, but again, it does provide a somewhat safer method of distribution than what's out there right now, just buying off the local drug dealer streets. And we have a lot of those dealers in Troy. Don't kid yourself. So,
Based on those comments, can I ask a question?
okay.
What type of change to our zoning code would be required to specify, if we're able to, the zones where these businesses could be located? I mean, are we saying that we could be that specific, that we can define this type of business and say that it can only be located in B4 district and it has to be, you know, 500 feet from a school, a church, or however? Can we make all those specifications and definitions, and what kind of zoning code change would be required?
Well, some of those, there are certain prohibitions on what the state allows, but the city certainly could say the operators can only be, and even break it down into the different types of operators, can only be located in certain districts. So.
But once you say that type of district, it's wherever that district is within the city.
Correct.
You can't specify one location.
Correct.
Okay. So if it's in all business districts or all, even if we took it to
you
B4 or whatever.
yeah,
it's
you can
everywhere.
list it, and if the B4 is the target, then you would list it in the B4, and we just have to be sensitive when somebody comes back and they're in a B3 and they want to, they ask us to rezone to B4, then you're correct. Now they have cannabis as one of the permitted uses in their new zoning district.
And also,
we don't
currently
have to approve those. I mean, we don't have to approve those changes. If somebody has
No, you're right.
somebody has a B3 lot and they say I want to go to B4,
You're correct.
we don't have to approve that. The zoning commission or the planning commission has that ability to say no on that.
No,
But
they
they
have
could
the
have
they have
another
the
reason
ability
for wanting to go to
not
B4.
recommend it. You guys are the ones that
Right.
would
Right.
have
So
to
the
codify.
city council could say no.
Yes.
Yeah. So we would have.
But theoretically, someone could come with a reason for going to B4 that we would approve, and 2 years down the road, it's a B4, and now that's a permitted use within that B4. I mean, I'm just saying.
But don't we
No, I
that-
mean, it could be they could build a strip mall, probably shouldn't use the word strip, but you know what I mean, a mini mall, and you know, they're likely not to have every space tenanted. They maybe have raw land and need it rezoned because they've got a plan to build a 5-unit or 5-storefront building, and they have 2 or 3 of them filled, and then, you know, they want to be 4 because it's got the laundry list of permitted uses, and then that would include the dispensary as one of them. That is
Could we
correct.
create a zoning district strictly for dispensaries?
I don't think that's.
I mean, can we like have a B6 or something and say, okay, this is where our cannabis, we want the cannabis, the dispensary is located?
That would, I mean, the planning commission would have to first make a recommendation in that regard, and that would take some sort of, zoning encompasses a lot of different things, the height of buildings, the setbacks, and things of that nature. So theoretically, you could redo the whole thing for one. Yeah, I guess the devil would be in the details, Mr. Schilling. That's a difficult question to ask.
Okay, but it's possible, right? In other words, we could define based on a number of different definitions to say this is where it's gonna be or no place else in the city of Troy.
Under certain circumstances, it's hard for me to say yes or no. It depends on the details of what you're proposing. There are certain prohibitions against spot zoning and things of that nature. So I hesitate to say yes, you can, and then we endeavor to try yes, you can, and then the details trip it up.
And if you're creating I've never heard of a single-use zoning district with just one principal permitted use, but, you know, the spot zoning issue comes to mind, but you'd also be creating a zoning district on paper and not have any zoning district actually enacted anywhere on any specific properties. And so I'm not sure that creates a legal issue because, you know, if there's something that's permitted or not expressly allowed to be excluded, such as the cannabis operations, then you sometimes get into an issue where you've got zoning exclusions that may not be entirely legal because, yeah, you got it on paper, but you haven't zoned any actual property, that B6 or whatever, you know, BC district.
Mr. Chairman, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Grant, this is more towards Grant, but I just want to go back through from what I thought I heard you say and just confirm it. So if, as Mr. Schilling has indicated in his discussion here, council wishes to amend the Planning Commission's recommendation, that would require 3/4 of council, that would require a supermajority vote or 3/4 of council vote? Well,
the first thing we'd have to do is there'd have to be a positive committee recommendation, and that would require a majority.
Okay.
And they would also have to specify what they want changed from the Planning Commission's recommendation, because if something is presented to council to vote upon, I have to prepare legislation setting up, okay, what are the zoning regulations? And that would require, that vote, if it differed from the Planning Commission recommendation, would require the affirmance of 3/4 of the council members.
Okay, and then another alternative is we can do nothing, and would that go back to planning?
Not automatically.
Okay. Or we can reject it, and then are we, this whole bifurcated theories of government, because as we learned a lot through the IOOF building, so does if we say, hey, we're going to reject this, but here's do they get a rationale why we're going to reject this, or what we would like to see come back?
Well,
because they're completely independent, right? They're
right.
Autonomous, so they don't have to listen to what council wants. I don't know, Patrick, am I making it more confusing? I'm confused in my mind.
So, Grant, if the council rejects this, though, is there not some, either in the rules of council or in the codified ordinances, that requires a period of time to pass before the same subject can come back to council, or would this contemplate that there be different language in a different ordinance?
If rules of council says it's done for the session, if we reject something, I mean, like when we did an amendment, if we reject the amendment, then that's done for the council for that term.
Well,
I would.
It's not the whole term.
I would.
Period of time, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have to check. There are certain aspects of the zoning code when somebody asks for and that may be different from a city initiated or planning commission initiated versus an application for a zoning change. I know what Mr. Titterington's referring to. There is a provision that prevents somebody from, submitting a zoning change and then getting rejected and then just turn around and starting the whole process. There is like a cooling off period. I would have to double check. I don't want to say affirmatively that there's definitely a 6-month cooling off period in this situation before they could consider that again.
So what happens if the committee splits on their recommendation?
Then, if the committee splits on a recommendation under council rules, there's essentially 2 different minority reports that are submitted to council, but no legislation would appear on the agenda. If somebody wanted, if council, and I would have to double check it, it's either 2/3 or 3/4 under the council rules, they could move to have it placed on the council agenda, either minority report.
Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
So if this committee votes to pass on the recommendation from Planning Commission, which is a ban on operators as it's written, if we voted as our report to pass that on to council, then legislation would be prepared stating that ban.
Correct.
However, at council, any member would be able to propose an amendment to that legislation, correct? But not act on it at that meeting.
Correct. Yes, there is a process for an amendment, and it could be amended. However, once amended, it would be subject to, the only way that amendment could be passed if it was 3/4.
And it has to be at another meeting, correct?
Depending upon the timing of when the amendment was made. I believe it says
but
that
let's say an amendment is proposed Monday night, then it has to sit for 2 weeks, and then that amendment is voted in 2 weeks, or the amended ordinance at the earliest could be voted 2 weeks later?
the amendment could be voted on Monday. However, I believe anything after the second reading, it adds an extra reading to it.
Can we extend the moratorium and ask the planning commission to reconsider based upon public comment?
What are they gonna say,
yeah.
Todd? I mean,
I don't think that asking them to reconsider is
yeah, they're just
not-
gonna come back with the same, I mean, they're gonna ban it again anyway.
Well, do you really think that they had that in-depth, I haven't looked, I'm sure it's online, that they had that in-depth of a conversation about if we do this and it gets referendum, that it could result in, downtown,
But if there were a referendum, we would simply extend the moratorium and we just stick with the status quo.
But I just
I know
thought
this
we
holds
couldn't
no
do that.
water, and Mr. Titterton was there, but when I watched that planning commission meeting, I thought it was, I don't know if it was a close run thing or not, I just felt like, well, I don't know what council's gonna say, but let's pass on to them. There was discussion about how the council would vote, whether the order overturned or not. I got the impression that it was a close run thing there, and they weren't sure how they wanted to make a decision.
And remember, they've already recommended banning medical marijuana to
it.
us.
That was my interpretation of watching that meeting. It was a little just, let's see what council says, was my
You know, if you push it back to the planning commission, we had planning commission today, and we were not planning on having one the week of Thanksgiving, because there was no business. Because it would still be timely, we could reach out to the planning commission and see if they want, if they could get together, say, next week, and then, have them either review this video, I know I'm dating myself, but just recognize that they're not compelled to have to do anything. But just given past practice and the way the planning commission operates, I don't think they're going to ignore the count. They'll be respectful and listen and debate what the council has said, and then deliberate again whether they reaffirm their, I should say because I'm on the planning commission, whether we affirm what originally was recommended, or getting this new feedback from the council modifies. We can't say until it would go back to them for discussion.
Just one more point of clarification.
I just wanted to confirm also, if the committee makes a recommendation to council different than what the planning commission has recommended, that is what you said requires a 3/4 approval vote at council.
3/4, 2/3.
Correct.
Okay.
And,
That one,
and
or
if it,
the other option, or the other way that you mentioned earlier,
mhm.
where it
The
goes as
amendment.
a band and then it's amended
Right.
at Monday. Either one of those two scenarios, yes.
Okay.
And
So
that's 7 members of council, being that it's the 3/4 supermajority, not the 2/3.
Trevor, Mr. Jason, if you could, I just want some clarify here. So, we want to put it in a district, a zoning district where we can, outside the downtown. We're worried maybe, hey, if someday down the future, someone wants to move to that zone because of whatever business reason, they could sneak in. But do not we have to approve
Yes.
every license? So if someone tried to
No.
go to we do not, so it's not like.
We do not approve.
It's not like asking for a liquor permit.
We
No, we don't
right.
approve a license,
We do
but
not do the licenses, the state approves the licenses.
But we can approve the zoning change or
But
not
there's
approve
no
it.
approval of store, once it's zoned, it passes and there's a zone, once it's a zone, there's nothing else to stop the store saying, this piece of land.
Except, well, they have to be legally operating with a license from the state, otherwise they won't.
And
won't
yeah,
give
and we can also
We
control the
wouldn't
number.
give them an occupancy permit, I believe, is.
Yeah, but
We can control the number that we have, so we can,
So what is this control? I'm just saying, but we can't control, like say, someone down the road changed their district, and now they're trying to sneak in through a loophole kind of, but we have no say whether that district changes, because that's kind of what we were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah, I think we're talking about two different
Yeah.
things. If, to have it, allowed requires a zoning code change, all right? And we want to be as specific as possible, recreational cannabis dispensary, all right? That way there is no confusion about any similar and like, interpretation in any other district, because there would be a specific principal permitted use in, let's use the B4. Once it's in there, and the council can regulate any zoning change application that came through from a property owner saying, hey, I'm in B3 and I would like to be rezoned B4. Once that happens, if the council ultimately says yes and goes through the hearing process and the 3 readings and the whole thing, then any property in the B4 would be able to do a cannabis dispensary, provided there is not a limitation on the number.
Right.
Because that is a specific carve-out in 3780.
and like a B4, that is designed as an interstate, businesses near the interstate anyway, so
Yeah.
you couldn't use a B4 zoning and move it downtown Troy.
But you could if somebody came to you and said, I want my B2 to be rezoned as B4, and they're in the downtown, and the council says, I'm not saying you would.
Yeah.
I'm just saying theoretically.
You could.
Because there are many more permitted uses in the B4 besides just this.
Once it's in a zoning district, anybody that's zoned properly in that district, that's a legal, legitimate, principal permitted use. Just to clarify on the B4, because I did get the zoning maps, the B4 is generally the area including Walmart and across the street.
Kroger.
It is. I don't know. It's not Kroger. It's across the street where the
Shell gas
business
station is.
park is.
Yeah.
It includes Shell gas station, Motel 6, the block between State Route 55 and 718.
Mm-hmm.
That area right there. It's those 2 areas.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand the sentiment of wanting to put it in one place. I'm concerned about the zoning issues that may arise by trying to do that. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just.
Well, and again, like I say, we can always control. It's not like we're going to have. It's not like gas stations. We're going to have 1 or 2 dispensaries, and that's basically it. So it's not like we're gonna have,
I would agree
it's not like
with the
they're
limiting
gonna
of the
proliferate.
number would be a more, sure way.
That's only true if you, as part of your amendment or as part of your final legislation, you include a restriction on the number of
Right,
licenses.
right. Well, that would have to happen, I think.
Well, that's,
My opinion.
And just
Mhm.
because I reread 3780 today, we're pretty far down the list for any of this to actually come to fruition, right? Because the first choice that the state went were existing dispensaries to get a dispensary, and then you have to petition the state and then go all the way down. So, we are looking in the future, which I think is good, but it would be a considerable amount of time for this issue to even come to fruition in our area.
I haven't checked to see the status on, I know there's a limitation on the number of permits for all 3 classes, operators, processors, cultivators. I can't tell you if the state has issued all of them right now. I don't know.
last time we knew, by the end of October, they still had existing license applications that they had not acted on from the medical,
Right,
facilities.
and I think the medical dispensaries got the first dibs, for lack of a,
Yes.
for a legal term, they got the first dibs to get the recreational dispensary, and then they'll go down.
And
That's
also,
correct.
correct me if I'm, we currently have a ban on medical dispensaries,
Right.
which we would have to change, because if we allow
No.
recreational, we have to
no,
allow
if-
medical, or?
If we, allow basically, part of that 7-page mumbo jumbo, and I agree, and it's like 0.2 font size as well. They're basically, what it amounts to is there's really no longer going to be a distinction between medical and recreational dispensaries unless the operator, owner of the dispensary, has that as part of their business plan, where they're only going to provide medical use with a doctor's excuse and not just general recreation.
need
It'll be
2
totally up
licenses?
to them.
Don't they need 2 licenses, one for
They will
medical,
need a
one-
second license for the recreation.
Recreational anyway.
Yes, and so that's basically, I think, just to clarify that they've been operating medically, according to the law, and it's a double check on that, so. But like I said, there's still, as of the end of October, there was still a backlog of getting those licenses, the medical operators that had, applied for recreational licenses, those either denied or issued.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, what are we gonna do here? Okay, Lynn, before we get started, let me say
I
that
still
I think
looked down all the notes on
there's
this
some
thing.
things that there's some things we have to talk about, I think. First, in other words, that, if we, I think that, as far as the laboratory, I think we have to admit that, but I think as far as the dispensary, then we have to decide whether or not we want to allow that or not. That's one question. We have a question on, if we allow a dispensary, where are we going to put it? That's the second question I think the committee has to answer. And then I think the third question is the number.
Mr. Schilling, and that's your role, I just want to ask a question. Would the committee consider having a second committee report so that some of this information can be gathered from the,
Committee meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry, a second meeting. Mr. Pierce isn't here. I know he sent an email.
He's ill tonight.
Yeah, he's ill tonight, and there's not a lot of members of council here either. That I understand it's their prerogative, and it's your prerogative as chairman of the committee. If you want to go forward, that's fine.
Yeah.
I am just as a council member saying, would you consider rescheduling one in 2 weeks and having another? I don't think we have a moratorium to January 19th, so I don't think there's a rush to get this out, but I'm not trying to step on your toes. It just is, as everything, there's just so few people that participate in the process, and then we get lots of people that complain about the process and the...
Well, I think if we could get something from staff that would give us some options, I mean, we're talking about either number, obviously, the first option is to not allow dispensaries. But if we decide, if there's enough interest in council to allow dispensaries, then we have to have some options on, as I say, where are we going to put it? How many are we going to allow? Those types of things. And so if staff could come together and give us some options on that, I think I would consider another meeting. If that's not a possibility, then we're going to have to, I think we can't just let it sit here.
Mr. Chair, I don't know that that it's appropriate for the staff to give you options, because you have, beyond the staff, at the next level up, you already have a recommendation from the Planning Commission, which is, above the staff when it comes to the order of procedure to get this in front of council. So you already have a Planning Commission recommendation for a total ban.
Okay.
One of the options, again, is you could send it back to the Planning Commission for further discussion, or you could, you could do the options that we've already talked about.
But here's my concern, is that if we're coming down to that we want to know where this will be and have a limited number, if the committee recommends that we want legislation prepared saying that we would like a limited number of zoning districts that this can be in, possibly one, and a limited number, possibly two, can we be that general and say, can we be that general, non-specific, and have legislation written? I guess my concern is, without understanding exactly, and I still have concerns about, like you mentioned, spot zoning, and if this would really stand up, can we make something that general of a recommendation and have legislation brought to council from that?
Well, I think if you've got a recommendation, if the committee's making a recommendation, if you two are in agreement that, number one, you want to allow X number of dispensaries, and you want to restrict that to, you want a guidance from us, we would say B4, B4 only, because that's the only one that keeps it away from the downtown, then that would be your recommendation to council. And correct me if I'm wrong, Grant, then you would write the draft, you would draft the legislation based on their recommendation, but recognizing that you're going to need the 7 to 9. Right. That's just a more efficient way of doing it, rather than recommending it as a ban and then amending it on Monday and then waiting so longer. This way, you're at least getting the legislation in front, and it can be acted on quicker, up or down.
And if it fails, then we're right where we are now.
Well, no, if
they overrule their committee report, if their recommendation, and the legislation's prepared, and it is 6-3 instead of 7-2 at the final hearing, then it's dead in the water, right?
Correct.
The amended ordinance
is still
dead in the water, but
the original, we still ban it if we wanted to.
The Planning Commission has still recommended a ban, so would the council not then be able to take up the original Planning Commission recommendation? All the failure of the amended means is that that you could not overturn what the Planning Commission was recommending.
But the committee right now, and I understand it, and I appreciate, Mr. Schilling, you said twice now, we don't know, and I think Ms. Snee did too, that the Planning Commission's not going to change their mind. I don't know that to be a fact, and I know Ms. Snee, I think you served on Planning Commission for a while. That might be true, but I can't imagine that if they watch this, Mr. Tiddington's a member of it, Mr. Davis will be there, I'm sure. If people go back and say, hey, this is creating some consternation in council, would you please reconsider this, that they wouldn't at least give it some sufficient consideration. And that way, if they do change their mind, they give us a new recommendation, then we can vote on it, incorporating what I believe at least the 4 council members that are present have all indicated that they would like to see happen, exclude it from downtown, and then decide what you want to do with it. Right now, and I appreciate Ms. Snee's concern, because I share it, these zoning codes, if we get referendumized, it would make me very nervous that it would not come back and potentially open up a door for somebody to bring one into the downtown. And that's my number one concern. Can they just recommend that it goes back to planning?
No.
Well-
The planning commission doesn't have to accept it.
Well, I mean, it would be the committee's report.
Yeah,
And-
you've already deferred a recommendation to council once on this
Mhm.
issue. You just continue to defer a recommendation pending more feedback from the planning commission. And we would endeavor to have that meeting set up for next week, or
So we
before.
would-
And what new,
We would meet.
other than our discussion, what new information is coming to planning commission?
They have some guidance on the discussion here,
Mhm.
that, it's not 9-0, that, necessarily or potentially, that there'd be a total ban. And,
Now-
by the way,
Okay,
we're
so
talking about
you're talking
specific
about, we would
districts.
meet the 25th.
Well, wait.
That would
The
be-
committee meeting, this committee would meet again the 25th.
Well, wait,
Well, it doesn't have to be
Hmm?
the 25th, it can be any time you can.
It's the
can I jump in there real
that's
quick?
the,
28th is Thanksgiving.
Oh, okay.
That's the Monday before.
That's the Monday, we would, if we could get that.
Or you could do it before then too, yeah, sometime before
Well,
Thanksgiving.
I mean, you're talking about next week and then.
But-
then we'll-
Mr. Chair, can I jump in on if planning commission issues a new recommendation, that might start the process over again on their new recommendation. So it wouldn't be immediately, occur again. We would follow the process like this is a new recommendation from planning commission.
that would
Which
come
just
back
means
to
it
this
comes back
committee.
here, there's no,
Right, that's what I'm
timeframe.
saying, we'd have a committee meeting on the 25th, we could review
That's the way
the
we
planning
do it.
commission, recommendation at that particular point in time. Right? I mean, they're gonna meet next week, and then the 25th is the week after.
It's,
Well, we would follow the normal procedure that we follow.
Well, that's
Whenever there's-
we would be scheduled to have a committee meeting anyway on the 25th.
yeah, you
I-
could. It is holiday week, we don't have to do it on that Monday, we've set that routine, but there are times when we will do it a different night, well, like tonight. For various reasons, so, we would just try to schedule that, the planning commission meeting as well as, council committee meeting before Thanksgiving.
Well, I mean, again, the problem is, yeah, we're, then you got December and all these other things, so again, we're looking at, I mean, we'll be pushing up into January to figure out what's going on this.
Well, and so I was going to jump in as well, that I would ask that if this is what the committee is asking to do, that you also, as part of your recommendation, maybe, on an emergency basis, just so we get it out of the way, extend the moratorium past January 19th, maybe add another 3 months, just so we,
Well,
have
let's-
enough time to go back and forth and do what we gotta do.
We can do that in January. I mean, we could hit that.
I would rather do it now because we are engaged in this process, and with the holidays, those are the kind of things that get lost.
Can we just put that on there, and if the votes aren't there?
Remember,
then it goes through
Mr.
regardless?
Schilling, just because we extend the moratorium another 3 months doesn't mean it, everything gets frozen that whole 6 months. It's up to the that 6 months or 5 months now. This just keeps it
So,
clean, and we don't have that
Our,
pressure.
Okay, I would still think we would meet the 25th and review anything that the planning commission would like to give us at that particular point in time, and that way we could get it to council by the 2nd of December.
as part of our,
We'd make a recommendation to council for their meeting on the 2nd of December. That way it's
So-
done.
All right, so what,
our report to council would include a request for this to be reviewed again by the planning commission.
No, I'm saying, our committee right now would say, okay, let's give the planning commission one more opportunity, meet next week, get back to us by the 25th. And then, and whatever they decide, we'll take a look at that particular point in time, and we'll make a recommendation to council on the
All right,
second.
but
I-
Mr. Schilling, in the meantime, we will have a status update report that will need to be read Monday night, saying you met, we discussed the issue, a committee report.
That's what
Right.
I'm trying to
Status
to
report.
understand.
It would just be another status report.
And that report would say that we had requested further input from the planning commission as soon as possible, because I'm not gonna hold a group of 7 people to say that they can schedule a meeting in a week. I hope they can. I'm sure that they'll try. And that we would try then to have a meeting on the 25th, but that would be,
Well,
Oh.
okay, I think we would have a meeting on the 25th, whether or not we get a recommendation from them or not,
if we have,
and then make a decision at that point in time.
well, if we don't have their
Then
input back, we don't need to have a meeting.
no, if we don't get a recommendation, then we make the decision ourselves.
Then there's no reason of
We're not
harassing the
changing.
planning commission.
Yeah, it is, because we'll accept their input. If they don't get it to us, then we'll proceed.
The planning commission will get more information based on the discussion tonight and the survey data. They may just decide, no, we're not gonna change our recommendation.
Right.
They may, do the opposite, but it's not without.
Do you feel fairly confident they can have a meeting next week? I mean, that's what I'm saying. I just don't know if we can
Well, we'll,
ask, demand that they have
no, we're not.
meeting. We
demanding.
can ask,
We're
but
just trying, we're just gonna try to pull one together. We can let you know probably tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, and then the only other concern is, if the planning commission makes a detailed recommendation allowing either the number of it and things like that, I know transparency's been an important part as far as, their recommendation, for the public to go ahead and review what their recommendation is. And I know that we went through a lot of this, so, to sort of fast track acting upon their recommendation, normally we have that recommendation on file for at least 30 days before it's acted upon. And I think that's, due consideration should be made for that as well.
Say what?
Whenever the planning commission makes a recommendation, it's usually, maintained on file so the public can review that recommendation before the council acts upon that.
Okay, that's in zoning code, non-text zoning code changes, and this was a textual one, so we didn't have the 30-day window for the public hearing. We held a public comments.
Well, we
But
did.
that was your opinion to us.
Well, and I think it's important, just to take that into consideration.
We'll push it out there. We'll get it out there, and if you wanna have public discussion at council meeting.
council wouldn't be able to act on it until December 2nd.
Legislation.
Yeah.
I don't think
No.
anyone's gonna put this as emergency legislation, no
That's
matter
not
what
what
we
we're-
end up with.
not what
No,
we're
I don't
talking
think so either.
No, we're not talking about emergency.
Why is that
No.
30-day?
No, that's, when you have a zoning code, the state law required zoning code changes, that's where you have the required public hearing, you have to post, you have to publish it for 30 days, that whole thing. This is a text change, so it was handled a little differently, but we still did have the public comment, public hearing part of it. I mean,
So if I'm understanding everything we're saying, our recommendation from the committee would be to request further input from the planning commission as soon as possible to potentially meet again as this committee on November 25th to make a recommendation to council based on new planning commission input, and I would add, and to recommend a 3-month extension on the current moratorium while this discussion is taking place.
We can consider that.
so it
Well,
would be, so that, you're saying that moratorium language, legislation would not be on Monday nights, but it could be at the December 2nd.
It could be on Monday night or December 2nd, because I would make that a part of the committee report as a separate item.
Okay. I'm not sure why we need to do another extension. I think we can get this thing done by the 19th.
And
And again, if we
then it's done.
find out we don't, we can always extend it later in December. And we got 4 meetings. We have 2 in December
We could
and
have
2 in January.
Yeah, we might have absences.
We don't know yet.
I
And
would
if we have
just
to do
as soon
this
put
by
it on this so
emergency,
that we're
that's,
covered while this discussion is taking place.
Remember, you need 7
If
votes
the
to
bill is
suspend, you need 6 votes to pass anything by emergency, so As the holidays come in, we start getting more of a bare majority.
Okay.
And the moratorium ends if we approve something.
If we pass it and then after the 30-day wait period goes over, then it's all.
So it's all in, okay, we'll consider the
Yeah.
emergency or we'll consider the, moratorium on that, extending that.
Okay. We'll have that on there as an emergency.
Okay. All agreed on that?
If those are the three things, I can agree to that.
Okay.
Moving on.
Okay. Anybody bring dinner in there or something? Okay, second item on the, Community and Economic Development Committee is provide a recommendation to council regarding the recommendation of the Troy Planning Commission that council accept the final plat of Addison Landing Subdivision Section 1 and dedication of right-of-way. The development is located along Dorset Road and Lytle Road. Anything good of the cause on that?
Yes, and Mr. Davis here is here to fill in the blanks, but this goes back to April 24th. Planning Commission did make a positive recommendation. The reason for the delay in coming to council was they needed to work out their escrow agreement or their, I guess their insurance, if you will. And so now we are to the point where we're asking council to approve the final plat for Section 1. That's about a little over 17.5 acres. There are 51 building lots. It is in substantial general compliance with the preliminary plan, and we're not asking for emergency, and you have the drawing in your packet.
Okay. I don't think we have any choice on that. I think we'll have to approve that.
I don't have any questions.
No
I'm
questions.
approving it. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Anything else before the committee?
The other three personnel items.
Not this one.
They have to come to
Well,
this
that's the
committee.
second committee. You're in charge of that.
I have no committee. It's coming to this committee.
It has been reassigned to the Community and
Oh, okay,
Economic Development
okay.
Committee.
I was
Now
under the
you-
impression we were gonna have a,
So keep going.
Please
Keep going.
Please continue.
okay, Personnel Committee, then we're now assuming the Personnel Committee responsibilities here. Okay, again, we are providing a recommendation to council regarding an adjustment to the hourly rate of seasonal, part-time, temporary, and intern positions to reflect the January 1st, 2025 adjustment in the Ohio minimum wage rate and the reclassification of 2 non-bargaining unit positions.
Okay.
Mr. Titterington.
Sure. So, as I think you're all aware, the state of Ohio has a different calculation they use to set minimum wage. They set it in variance to the federal minimum wage. It is substantially higher, but it is an automatic increase, but council has to codify it before the beginning of every year so that it's in effect. For 2025, that minimum wage is $10.70. In our wage scales, minimum wage is always step 1, but our positions have various numbers of steps, 8 to 10, depending on which classification they are, and so we make adjustments to each step after it's been triggered as from an increase in the minimum wage, and you have that schedule in front of you. Along the same lines, intern hourly rates as well need to be adjusted accordingly. And then we do have 2 positions that we've done some reclassification studies on. One, and they were originally in the grade schedule as passed by council earlier or late last year, I guess. The first one is the clerk position in the police department. In other departments, the clerical position that supports the administrative staff, namely the police chief in this case, is clerk typist. Her duties and responsibilities are at least equal to what the other clerk typists do. And so we are recommending that the clerk in the police department, the administrative clerk in police department, be reclassed up to clerk typist. The other one is we did a reclassification of the groundskeeper, not gownskeeper, but groundskeeper position at Miami Shores Golf Course. And in looking at the duties and responsibilities, especially the supervisory responsibilities, the fact that he is at a grade 4 does not reflect the duties that he has. They're more apt, applicable to a grade 6, and so we are recommending a reclass to grade 6. And I believe I pointed this out in the 2-hour marathon on Monday night, but we did include those adjustments, so we were not short in the budget for 2025. Okay. We are not asking for emergency legislation.
Do we have any problem hiring anybody at $10.70 an hour?
I mean, just as a general rule, it's harder to recruit part-time and seasonal employees, since most of the, almost all of the positions are at the front line, lower level labor type positions, even though we're not using the classification laborer anymore. But certainly the fact that the state's minimum wage is significantly higher than, it's like either $2 or $3 more than the federal government. We have to recruit. We have those that come back year after year, and we appreciate that, and that's why we have the steps in place. So we almost hope that we're paying a bunch of part-timers at step 4 because they're repeats. But we know that pool, regardless of what step and what the minimum wage number is, it's always a challenge to fill. But we do every year.
Okay.
Is the only thing that moves you up the steps another year gaining
It's an annual
experience?
thing, yes.
Okay,
so
it's
that
not
when they come
bringing
back,
experience to the position.
That could be taken into consideration, especially if they lateral from somewhere else and they say, hey, we'd really like to work here. I've been working as a part-timer here and I'm making X amount. We'll try to accommodate them within reason. Yeah. We do have some flexibility.
Okay. Yeah, because
Move forward. I would recommend we move forward.
I think we can do that. Okay. Number 2 is provide a recommendation to council regarding authorizing an agreement with the Emeritus for the employee group dental plan. Consideration of emergency legislation is requested. We've used them before.
We are in it, and we have not used them before. We have, for the past several years, used Superior Dental, which had been previously approved. Superior was acquired by one of the larger health insurance companies. They proposed a significant increase. Typically, we've been able to get 2-year contracts where the increase only happens once every 2 years. In this case, it was almost 10%, and it was only good for 1 year. 10% was kind of high, and the fact that it was only 1 year guarantee, it gave us some uncertainty, and it made it a lot more expensive than we wanted to. Emeritus does offer pretty much identical benefits, and however, it will throw some more employees out of network, which we will help them with. Might require some additional work on their end to get reimbursed. Personally, I've been in that situation for the last 2 years, thanks to my dentist, not thanks to our insurance.
Right.
And so I can attest, and I did verify this with my wife, that it's not the end of the world. And so that Emeritus will guarantee their rates, which are actually a slight reduction over what we're paying now. They will guarantee that for 2 years and not the 1 year. And so we'll have a period of time where we can assess them, and after 2 years, if, we're not doing well with them or we're getting a lot of complaints or problems, we can then, go back to our pool and they will give us some other options.
Yeah, I'm in the same situation. My dentist doesn't accept our dental insurance. So,
Yeah.
you know, so again, I don't know if that creates a problem with our employees.
And there's one large dental practice that they stopped doing that 2 years ago, and it wasn't as, it's not ideal, but it wasn't as hateful as it could have been. And since Emeritus has never been recognized, I think it might be a relatively newer plan. We need to come to council to get them added.
Okay.
And we are asking for emergency because the plan year either started or is coming up, January 1. Yeah,
Okay.
So.
Well, I guess we move forward on that with emergency. Okay. Okay, finally, provide a recommendation to council regarding including creative staffing of Worthington, Ohio, to the authorized temporary employment agencies used by city departments.
So actually, Creative Financial is one of several different groups that we would like to council to recognize and would be in the ordinance. There are several of them that we've noticed that just through the years, through different acquisitions, names have changed. The firms have that we might have been using in the past have started to specialize. Their names have changed. There are other new agencies that we use that only provide staffing for certain professions. And so we wanted to do some cleanup as well as adding Creative Financial to the list.
Creative staffing.
Well, it's actually
Creative Financial Staffing is,
Creative
is the name of it, yeah.
Creative Financial,
And in those cases, you know, there are times when we will hire directly as part-time employees, and they'll be city employees, but in many cases, we primarily use staff mark employees as a temporary agency, and then we just pay staff mark, and they do all the recruiting for us. Those are staff mark is typically at the either the clerical or the laborer level. In this case, Creative Financial, they will be hiring a part-timer from that firm to do some income tax work for us, so it's more specialized. People First Staffing is another one. Staff Mark I mentioned because we've used them for years, but they've changed their name once or twice. Interim Personnel, CBS Personnel, we're verifying that those two still exist under those names. And then AccuSource is another one. So you may have as many as 6 listed on the final legislation, but it's the same concept.
Okay.
And we are not asking for emergency legislation, right? No, we are asking for emergency legislation because Ronnie's
I think we can move
staff
forward with that.
with emergency.
Yes. Anything else before the committee?
No, sir.
I think we're done.
We're done.
Thank you all for attendance. We appreciate it.